Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here at CBT News. Urban Science has released its mid-year franchise activity report, also known as the FAR. Joining me now is Mitch Phillips, who's the Global Director of Data at Urban Science. Mitch, thanks so much for joining me on the show once again.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So the study mentions a slight increase in the number of dealerships in the U.S. What factors are driving this growth, and how does it compare to previous years?
In fact, it's extremely slight, and it's a stable industry sales volume, and it's been stable counts for a very long time, ever since around 2010, 2011. So there's not much going on other than it is a consistent, good, stable dealership count.
Sure, sure. And in the past, we've seen actually the number of dealerships dwindling, right? Versus increasing.
Yeah, prior to that, it was dwindling about 1% per year on the total number of brick and mortar stores. But in the past 10 to 15 years, it's been very stable, adding on a net basis 100 stores or detracting 100 stores a year. But out of 18,000 stores, that's not a lot.
Sure, sure. But while we see that the number of dealerships have increased, the number of franchises have decreased, correct?
Yeah, that swings all the time. Franchises come and franchises go, or they combine brands together. So that's just part of the normal course of business. But also over that time period, there's about 30,000 franchises in the country, there's been over 30,000 franchises since about 2013. So it's very minor.
Okay. Yeah, it's stabilized for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So the projected rise in throughput, which is the number of vehicles a dealership sells, from 851 units in 2023 to 879 units in 2024 is significant. What does this mean for dealership profitability and inventory management?
Well, let's define throughput first. That's the number of sales that they make across the board divided by the number of dealerships. And since the dealership count is stable, that's really controlled by the sales up or down of the industry.
Right.
So that's the main contributor. Through past COVID, we've had supplier constraints, had inventory issues. That's gone up and down. The dealership count really hasn't. But knowing what's right in the market, what's needed, is very important, especially as inventory grows, as it has since the past couple of years. It's gone basically from a projected over COVID was around 30, 45 days on an industry average for the number of days supply, to now around 50 or 60, which seems to be coming the new normal, but it is increasing. So there's more inventory to go that's gone around, and there's the same amount of consumers that are looking for product that are now available for them to grab them. So knowing what works in your market as far as the type of unit as well as the details of the unit, that would be important for managing your inventory.
And do you take into account Tesla and Lucid and Rivian in these counts? Is that a factor, or
Yes.
It is? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, that said, we have to estimate Tesla sales, some of the Rivian sales. However, they have a different cadence right now. So as it stands, Tesla's it's a little bit less than before as far as demand, but they continue to increase or decrease their price to increase their demand or decrease their demand for the public.
Was there anything from the report that surprised you?
Not really. If you look at which markets are there, that's the traditional markets of Texas, which is one of the largest. Florida's in there. California's in there as the most active. But then New York, for this first 6 months, New York is not in there at all.
Yeah.
So that is a slight surprise. but that the fact that 97% of the markets had virtually no net change whatsoever, which is plus or minus one dealership in a market
Yeah.
on a net basis, that percentage continues to surprise me
Yeah.
year after year after year.
Okay. Okay. And then given the current trends, what do you foresee for the U.S. dealership landscape over the next few years?
Over the next few years, it would be getting better. I mean, we have an industry of around 16 million. Forecast this year to be about 16.1 million.
Right.
Interest rates are currently high. The Fed is going to make a decision about decreasing their rates. So the second half of the year might get off better than the first half. The first half was fairly stable with about less than a 1% increase in total sales. But as more sales come about, the picture's looking rosier and rosier. The other thing that surprised me on the sales, it's a different mixture as hybrids are now more popular or are more resurging and actually are selling as much as both plug-in and battery, which is finding a large percentage increase. That's also the next hurdle to go for is the fuel type. And how we're going to deal with that in sales and in service, training the consumer, having the electric chargers available. Those are all challenging moving forward.
Sure. It seems as though the hybrids and the plug-in hybrids have really become the bridge that's going to get us to a full EV environment over the course of time, right? That consumers said, well, I'm in on the plug-in hybrid, maybe the hybrid, but I'm not all in on a full EV yet, right?
Yeah, and so far, the first 6 months of the year, if you look at, let's say there's 100 industry vehicles in your market, typically one out of every, well, for the first thing, plug-in hybrids and battery electric is about one out of every 10. But the gas electric hybrid is also one out of every 10. So that's 20% when you add those together of the entire volume. And there's also a whole bunch of considerations, training.
Sure.
But hybrids right now seem to be, and the plugins, as calming the consumer on any of their fears on range anxiety or lack of proper charges, or not having the households where they can actually plug in at home to get us over the hump before they go to either an alternative fuel, which might be the battery electric, it also might be the hydrogen, and it also might be alternative fuel, which is being played with. Also, there's a bunch of those right now.
Yeah, for sure. It does a presidential election like we find ourselves in the middle of right now, a very unique one to say the least. Does that play much of a role in the industry, the auto industry?
It has and it hasn't. It all goes back to, does the consumer feel that they'll have enough income to buy the car, which is the marginal portion. I mean, everybody who leases a car, as an example, every 3 years they have to get a new one, but the others are kind of optional. So they have to ask themselves, will I have the income to move forward to get the next car? But traditionally, presidential elections have a small impact on the demand, but the demand is really based on the consumer itself. Yeah.
And we're still dealing with somewhat of a pent-up demand, right? Since COVID, when leasing was down and car sales and everything else was down. So we're still realizing some of that, right?
We're realizing some of that. That's true. I think it's getting less and less.
Yeah.
But if you had to get a car during that period, it may not have been the car you wanted, the color you wanted, the options you wanted. Maybe it was more, maybe it was less, based on availability. As now availability begins to smooth out, we're much better. And getting the consumer to come in to fill their needs.
Yeah. That consumer that bought, but now they want to get into the car they really wanted. So,
Right.
yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. So, and we're also seeing leasing coming back, right, to pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, leasing is usually about 20% of the market
Yeah.
in the good years, and it got down to in the 12% earlier on.
Yeah.
As now more incentives move over, that's also been total incentives, either leasing or buying, had been less over that period. That's now making a slower comeback.
Right. Right. All interesting stuff. And so Mitch Phillips, the Global Director of Data at Urban Science, which is a phenomenal company. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Very much appreciated. I know that our dealer viewers will get a lot out of your visit with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.